The scorching August sun beat down on Ruby Faulkner's shoulders as she stared at the auction block in front of the Clifton Hill courthouse, her stomach knotting with dread. The small gathering of townspeople shifted uncomfortably in the Montana heat, their faces a mixture of pity and curiosity as Sheriff Malcolm Jenkins unfolded the official notice that would strip away her family's ranch, the last connection to her late father. The Faulkner property, approximately 160 acres with accompanying structures, is hereby seized by Granite County for failure to pay back taxes amounting to $342, the sheriff announced, his voice carrying across the dusty town square. Bidding will commence at $400. Ruby gripped her worn leather gloves tighter, blinking back tears of frustration. At 24, she had spent the past 18 months since her father's passing trying to keep the ranch afloat, but a combination of drought, predators thinning her herd, and the discovery of her father's unpaid tax burden had finally broken her. She had nothing left to sell, no collateral for another loan, and no family to turn to. $400, called a familiar voice that made Ruby's blood run cold. Horace Bellamy, the wealthy owner of the neighboring ranch who had been trying to absorb her family's land for years. His thin lips curved into a smile beneath his neatly trimmed mustache. $400 from Mr. Bellamy, Sheriff Jenkins confirmed, scanning the small crowd. Do I hear $450? The silence that followed was deafening. Ruby closed her eyes, unable to watch as her home slipped away. Then a deep voice cut through the quiet. $342. Murmurs rippled through the crowd as a tall figure stepped forward from the shadows of the general store's awning. Dust clung to his worn denim pants and faded blue shirt, and a week's worth of stubble darkened his sun-bronzed face. Ruby recognized him vaguely as one of the cowboys who had ridden through town a few days prior, with a cattle drive headed north. Sheriff Jenkins frowned. "Sir, the bidding starts at $400. I'm not bidding," the stranger interrupted, his voice calm but firm. "I'm paying her tax debt, $342. He reached into his vest pocket and pulled out a leather pouch, counting out the exact sum in gold coins and placing them on the sheriff's table with a decisive clink. The crowd fell silent, and Ruby stared at the stranger, bewildered. Horace Bellamy's face darkened with anger. "This is an auction, Cowboy," Bellamy snapped. "You can't just—" "Actually, he can," Sheriff Jenkins interrupted, examining the gold pieces. "The law states that the property owner may settle the debt in full any time before the property is sold." He looked uncomfortable as he gathered the coins. "If Miss Faulkner's debt is paid, there's no legal cause for auction." The stranger's eyes, a startling shade of blue against his tanned skin, briefly met Ruby's before looking back at the sheriff. "The debt is paid, then?" "This is outrageous," Bellamy spluttered, his face reddening. "Jenkins, you know as well as I do that the law is the law, Horace," Jenkins said firmly, handing Ruby a receipt. "Miss Faulkner's property is no longer subject to seizure." He turned to the crowd. "The auction is canceled." As the disappointed onlookers dispersed, Ruby found herself standing face to face with her unexpected savior. Up close, she could see the fine lines around his eyes, the kind that came from years of squinting against the sun. He was older than she had initially thought, perhaps in his early 30s. "Why?" she asked simply, her voice barely above a whisper. The cowboy adjusted his hat. "Seemed like the right thing to do." He offered nothing more, turning to leave. "Wait," Ruby called after him. "At least tell me your name." He paused, looking back over his shoulder. Dawson Burke." "Mr. Burke, I don't know how to thank you or how I'll ever repay you." "Don't need thanking or repaying, Miss Faulkner." He tipped his hat. "Good day." Before she could respond, He was striding down the dusty main street toward the livery stable, leaving Ruby standing in the shadow of the courthouse with a receipt in her hand and a debt to a stranger she might never see again. The summer heat still hung heavy in the air as Ruby rode her mare back to the Faulkner ranch that afternoon. The relief of keeping her land warred with a gnawing sense of uncertainty. $342 was a fortune, her entire tax burden paid by a passing cowboy who wanted nothing in return. Such things simply didn't happen, not in her experience. As the weathered fence posts of her property came into view, she noticed a thin plume of smoke rising from her cabin's chimney. Alert instantly, she urged her horse into a trot. She hadn't left any fire burning. Approaching cautiously, she dismounted and tied her horse to the hitching post, retrieving the old shotgun her father had taught her to use from its saddle holster. The door to her cabin was ajar, and the scent of coffee wafted outside. Ruby steeled herself and pushed the door open with the barrel of her shotgun. Inside, Dawson Burke stood at her stove, a coffee pot in his hand. His own horse was nowhere to be seen. "Mr. Burke," she exclaimed, lowering her weapon, "what are you doing in my home?" He turned, seemingly unsurprised by her armed entrance. "Making coffee. Hope you don't mind. Your roof's leaking in 3 places, your north fence line is down, and your barn door is hanging by one hinge." He poured the coffee into 2 chipped mugs. "Thought we should talk about fixing those things before I head out." Ruby set the shotgun aside, confusion evident on her face. "I don't understand. You said you wanted nothing in return." "I don't." He offered her a mug. "But those cattle rustlers that have been hitting ranches north of here won't care much about your property rights when they come through next week. Would be a shame to save your ranch from the tax collector only to lose your livestock to thieves." Ruby accepted the coffee cautiously. "How do you know about rustlers?" "Been tracking them with the cattle drive. They've hit 3 ranches in the past month. Pattern says you're likely next." He took a sip from his mug. "I've got 2 weeks before I need to catch up with my outfit in Helena." "Figure that's enough time to help you shore up your defenses." Ruby stared at him, trying to make sense of this taciturn cowboy and his unexpected generosity. "Mr. Burke, while I appreciate your concern, I can't accept more charity. I already owe you more than I could repay in years." Dawson's expression remained impassive. "Not charity, just being neighborly. We're not neighbors. You don't even live here." A hint of a smile touched the corner of his mouth. "Everybody's a neighbor somewhere, Miss Faulkner." As the evening light began to fade, Ruby found herself standing beside Dawson on her porch, watching as the sunset painted the distant mountains in shades of gold and purple. He had spent the afternoon examining her property, making a mental inventory of repairs needed, all while sharing almost nothing about himself despite her questions. "Why did you really pay my taxes, Mr. Burke?" Ruby asked finally, breaking the comfortable silence that had settled between them. Dawson was quiet for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "My mother lost our farm in Kansas when I was 12. Tax auction. No one stepped in to help." He took a breath. "She died the following winter. Always thought things might have been different if someone had given her a fair chance." The simple admission, delivered without self-pity, made Ruby's chest tighten. "I'm sorry," he shrugged. "Long time ago." He turned to face her. "I'll sleep in your barn tonight, head into town tomorrow for supplies. We'll start with the roof." "Mr. Burke, I can't let you." "Dawson," he interrupted. "If I'm going to be fixing your roof, you might as well use my given name." Despite herself, Ruby smiled. "Dawson then, and I'm Ruby." He nodded once. "Ruby." The way he said her name, careful and deliberate, sent an unexpected warmth through her. "Get some rest. Tomorrow will be a long day." As she watched him walk toward the barn, Ruby couldn't shake the feeling that her life had just changed in ways she couldn't yet understand. The following week brought a rhythm to the ranch that it hadn't seen since before her father's illness. Each morning, Ruby would wake to find Dawson already at work mending fences, reinforcing the barn, or patching the roof. They would break for a simple lunch, often eating in companionable silence before returning to their tasks until dusk. Despite his reticence, Ruby gradually pieced together fragments of Dawson's life through brief conversations. He had been riding with cattle drives for nearly 15 years, saving what money he could with dreams of his own ranch someday. He could read and write better than most cowboys, thanks to his mother's insistence on education. He had a knack for breaking difficult horses and preferred the stars to a proper roof most nights. What struck her most was his complete lack of expectation. He worked tirelessly, accepting only meals in return, and never once hinted at wanting more from her. It was refreshing and unsettling all at once. On the 6th day, as they were repairing the corral fence, Ruby paused, wiping sweat from her brow. "Why haven't you bought your own ranch yet? You seem to know more about ranching than most men who own land around here." Dawson considered the question as he hammered a nail into place. "Land's expensive. Good land, anyway." He tested the fence post with a firm push. "Been saving, but it takes time. How much do you have saved, if you don't mind my asking?" She immediately regretted the personal question. "I'm sorry, that's none of my business." "Had about 800 before your taxes," he replied matter-of-factly without resentment. "Still have enough to make a start when the right opportunity comes." Ruby's guilt intensified. "Dawson, I don't." His tone was gentle but firm. "I made a choice. No regrets." That night, a summer storm rolled in, bringing much-needed rain to the parched land. Ruby sat on her porch, watching the water pour from the newly repaired roof into neat channels rather than through the ceiling as it would have a week ago. The door opened behind her and Dawson emerged with 2 steaming mugs. "Thought you might want some coffee to watch the rain," he said, handing her one. "Thank you." She took the mug, their fingers brushing briefly. "The roof's holding well. Should do." He settled beside her on the porch step, a respectable distance away. "Rain's good for your pastures." Ruby nodded, sipping her coffee. The comfortable silence they often shared felt different tonight, charged with something she couldn't quite name. "My father loved summer storms," she said finally. "Said they reminded him that even the driest spells eventually end." Wise man. He was. Ruby smiled at the memory. "He taught me everything I know about this ranch, but it's still not enough, without you showing up when you did." "You'd have found another way," Dawson said with quiet confidence. Ruby shook her head. "I'm not so sure." She looked at him in the dim light from the window. "You've been here a week, and already the ranch is in better shape than I've managed in a year on my own." "You were doing fine, considering." "Considering what?" "That you're alone, that the bank and Bellamy have been working against you, that last year's drought hit everyone hard." He met her gaze directly. "Most men would have folded under half those pressures. You're still fighting." The simple acknowledgement of her struggle, delivered without condescension, touched something deep within Ruby. For the first time since her father's death, she felt truly seen. "2 days ago," she began hesitantly, "in town, Mrs. Peterson at the general store asked if you were courting me." She felt her cheeks warm at the admission. "People are talking." Dawson was silent for a moment, his expression unreadable in the shadows. "People always talk. Does it bother you?" The question caught her off guard. Did it bother her? The town's speculation about her relationship with Dawson should have concerned her, an unmarried woman living alone with a cowboy she barely knew was fodder for gossip. Yet she found herself more troubled by the knowledge that he would be leaving in a week than by what anyone might think. "No," she answered honestly. "It doesn't bother me." Something shifted in his eyes, a flicker of something warm before he looked away. "Good." The rain continued to fall, enveloping the porch in a curtain of water, creating a private world where only the two of them existed. When Dawson's hand cautiously covered hers on the rough wooden step between them, Ruby didn't pull away. The following morning, Ruby woke to an empty house, and a moment of panic that Dawson had left without saying goodbye. Her fears were allayed when she spotted him through the window, leading his horse back from the creek, his shirt soaked from what appeared to be an early morning wash. The sight of him tall and lean against the backdrop of her land stirred feelings she had been trying to suppress. In just over a week, this quiet, hard-working man had become a fixture in her life, one she was growing increasingly reluctant to part with. As she prepared breakfast, Ruby heard a horse approaching at speed. Looking out the window, she saw Sheriff Jenkins riding hard toward the house. Dawson intercepted him at the gate. Grabbing her shawl, Ruby hurried outside to join them, catching the tail end of the sheriff's message. "Headed this way, according to my deputy. At least 4 of them, maybe more," Jenkins was saying, his normally composed face lined with concern. "The rustlers?" Dawson asked, his posture suddenly alert. Jenkins nodded grimly. "Hit the Anderson place last night. Took 20 head and shot old man Anderson when he tried to stop them. He'll live, but they're bolder than we thought." He glanced at Ruby. "Miss Faulkner, I'd advise you to stay in town for a few days. These men are dangerous." "I'm not abandoning my ranch," Ruby replied firmly. "Stubborn as your father," Jenkins sighed. "I've got men riding the outer properties, but we're spread thin. These rustlers could show up any time in the next day or two." "We'll be ready," Dawson said, his voice carrying a quiet authority that seemed to reassure the sheriff. "You planning to face down 4 armed men alone, Burke?" "Not alone," Ruby interjected. "It's my ranch. I'll defend it too." Jenkins looked between them with a mixture of resignation and respect. "Your father taught you to shoot, if I recall." "He did." "Good." The sheriff adjusted his hat. "I'll send someone to check on you when I can spare the men. In the meantime, stay vigilant." With a final nod, he turned his horse and rode back toward town. As his figure receded in the distance, Ruby turned to Dawson. "What do we do?" Dawson's expression was thoughtful, calculating. "Move your cattle to the south pasture. It's more defensible with the creek on one side and the rise on the other. We'll need to set up watch rotations." He looked at her directly. "Can you really handle a rifle?" "My father made sure of it. I'm a better shot than most of the men in Clifton Hill." A hint of a smile touched his lips. "Good. Let's get to work." The day passed in a flurry of activity. They moved the small herd of 30 cattle to the south pasture, reinforced the corral gate, and prepared the barn as a fallback position. Dawson cleaned and checked both his rifle and Ruby's, showing her a few tricks for faster reloading that he'd learned over the years. As dusk approached, they took up positions on the porch, watching the road and the northern approach to the property. The tension of waiting wound Ruby's nerves tight, making her jump at every distant sound. "How can you be so calm?" she asked Dawson, who sat beside her, his rifle across his lap, his eyes constantly scanning the horizon. "Not my first standoff," he replied simply. "Won't be the last." Ruby studied his profile in the fading light. "You've had a dangerous life, haven't you?" he shrugged. "No more than most men who live on the move." "Is that what you want, to always be moving?" The question hung between them, laden with meaning neither was ready to acknowledge. After a long moment, Dawson shook his head. "No, never wanted that, just how things worked out." "What do you want then?" His eyes met hers, intense and honest. "Land, a home, something that's mine." He paused. "Someone to share it with." The admission, so plainly stated yet so revealing, made Ruby's heart race. Before she could respond, a flicker of movement in the distance caught her attention. "Dawson," she whispered, pointing. He followed her gaze, immediately alert. "I see it. Get inside, away from the windows." "I'm staying with you." "Ruby, it's my ranch," she insisted, gripping her rifle. "I'm defending it." For a tense moment they stared at each other, then Dawson nodded. "Stay low. Don't fire unless I do." As darkness fell completely, 4 riders emerged from the tree line, moving slowly toward the ranch house. They stopped at a distance, conferring among themselves before one broke away, approaching the house while the others fanned out around the property. "Evening," the man called out when he was within earshot. "Anyone home?" Dawson stepped forward slightly, keeping Ruby behind him. "State your business." The rider stopped, squinting through the darkness. "Just passing through, looking for a place to water our horses." "Creek's half a mile back," Dawson replied evenly. "You passed it." A tense silence followed. Ruby could feel the menace emanating from the stranger, could see the hands of the distant riders moving toward their weapons. "Might be we're looking for more than water," the man said finally, his voice dropping its pretense of friendliness. "Heard this ranch was run by a woman alone. Thought she might appreciate some protection." "She's not alone," Dawson stated firmly. "And she's protected." The man chuckled, a sound devoid of humor. "1 man against 4. Those aren't good odds, friend." "Better than you think," came a new voice from the darkness to their left. Ruby turned to see Sheriff Jenkins emerging from the shadows, rifle raised, with 2 deputies flanking him. Relief flooded through her. The rustler's hand twitched toward his gun, but Dawson's voice cut through the night. "I wouldn't. Sheriff's deputies have been in position since sunset. You're surrounded." It was a bluff. Ruby knew there were only the 3 lawmen, but delivered with such conviction that the rustler hesitated. That moment of indecision was enough. Jenkins and his men closed in, weapons trained on the 4 intruders. "Hands where I can see them, gentlemen," Jenkins ordered. "You're under arrest for the robbery and assault at the Anderson Ranch, and I suspect we'll find plenty more charges once we start looking." What followed was a brief but tense standoff that ended with the rustlers surrendering, disarmed by the decisive show of force. As Jenkins and his deputies led the men away, the sheriff paused beside Dawson. "Good work, Burke. Your signal fire on the ridge let us know they were here without tipping them off." Ruby turned to Dawson in surprise. "Signal fire? When did you?" "While you were moving the last of the cattle," he explained. "Set it up as a precaution." Jenkins tipped his hat to Ruby. "Your father would be proud, Miss Faulkner. Not many would stand their ground like you did." After the sheriff and his prisoners disappeared down the road, Ruby and Dawson stood in silence on the porch, the adrenaline of the confrontation slowly ebbing away. "You knew they'd come tonight," Ruby said finally. "That's why you were so prepared." Dawson nodded. "Rustlers are creatures of habit. They hit quickly after their last job before word spreads too far." He looked at her with newfound respect. "You didn't flinch." "I was terrified," she admitted. "Being brave isn't about not feeling fear. It's about what you do despite it." Ruby stepped closer to him, close enough to see the rise and fall of his chest, to smell the leather and pine scent that she had come to associate with him. "What you said earlier, about wanting land and a home and someone to share it with." His eyes, intense and guarded, met hers. "What about it?" Ruby gathered her courage. "What if you already found it?" The question hung in the air between them, its implications clear. Dawson's expression shifted, surprise giving way to something warmer, more vulnerable than she had yet seen from him. "Ruby, I've got nothing to offer you." "No land, no home, you have yourself," she interrupted. "That's more than enough." For a moment he said nothing, and Ruby feared she had misread everything between them. Then slowly, deliberately, he closed the distance between them, his hand coming up to gently touch her cheek. "You deserve better than a drifter with empty pockets," he murmured. "I deserve someone who sees me for who I am," Ruby countered, her voice stronger than she felt. "Someone who doesn't need to be asked to help, who works without complaint, who treats me as an equal." She placed her hand over his. "I deserve you, Dawson Burke, if you'll have me." The kiss that followed was gentle at first, a tentative exploration that quickly deepened into something more profound. When they finally parted, breathless and trembling, the world seemed to have shifted on its axis. "Stay," Ruby whispered against his lips. "Not just for another week, stay for good." Dawson's arms tightened around her, his forehead resting against hers. "Are you sure? People will talk." Ruby laughed softly. "People are already talking. Let's give them something worth the gossip." The sunrise the next morning found them sitting side by side on the porch steps, watching as golden light spread across the ranch that was now, in some indefinable way, theirs together. Dawson's arm was wrapped around Ruby's shoulders, her head resting against him as they shared coffee and quiet conversation about the future. "We should make it official," Dawson said suddenly, "before anyone can question your reputation." Ruby looked up at him, amused. "Are you proposing, Mr. Burke?" He met her gaze steadily. "I believe I am, Miss Faulkner, though it's not the romantic gesture you deserve." "I don't need romance," she replied softly. "I just need you." "You'll have both," he promised. "If you'll be patient with me while I learn how to give them." Ruby's answer was another kiss, this one filled with promise and certainty. The challenges ahead, rebuilding the ranch, facing the town's inevitable gossip, merging two independent lives seemed less daunting in the warm light of morning, with his arms around her. 2 days later, they rode into Clifton Hill together. The small town buzzed with news of the rustler's capture, but that gossip quickly gave way to fresh speculation as Ruby and Dawson made their way to Reverend Miller's house hand in hand. They were married that afternoon, in a simple ceremony with Sheriff Jenkins and his wife as witnesses. Ruby wore her mother's blue dress, freshly pressed for the occasion, and Dawson had purchased a new shirt, his one concession to formality. The Reverend spoke of partnership and perseverance, of building a life together on foundations of mutual respect and love. As they exchanged vows, Ruby thought of how unlikely their meeting had been, a chance encounter at an auction block that should have marked the end of her time at the ranch, not the beginning of a new chapter. Dawson's hands were steady as he slipped a simple gold band onto her finger, his eyes never leaving hers as he promised to cherish and protect her for all his days. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," Reverend Miller declared, his kind face beaming with approval. "Mr. Burke, you may kiss your bride." The kiss they shared was brief but tender, mindful of their audience yet unmistakably passionate. When they turned to face the small gathering, Ruby was surprised to see several townspeople had slipped into the Reverend's parlor to witness the ceremony, their expressions ranging from curiosity to genuine delight. Mrs. Peterson from the general store was the first to approach them. "I knew it," she declared triumphantly, patting Ruby's arm. "The moment I saw him pay your taxes, I said to my husband, that man's not doing it out of charity. Mark my words, he's smitten." Dawson's ears reddened slightly, but he didn't contradict her, simply nodding politely as the townspeople offered their congratulations. On their way out of town, they were stopped by Horace Bellamy, his expression sour as he blocked their path. "Quite the whirlwind courtship," he remarked coldly. One might think there were expedient reasons for such haste. Dawson's posture stiffened, but Ruby squeezed his hand in warning. "The only expedient thing, Mr. Bellamy," she replied sweetly, "was removing any obstacle to my happiness. Good day to you." As they rode away, Dawson chuckled. "You handled that better than I would have." "Horace Bellamy has been underestimating me for years," Ruby replied. "I've learned it's better to disappoint him with kindness than give him the satisfaction of seeing my temper." "Wise woman," Dawson murmured, admiration clear in his voice. "I've married above my station." Ruby laughed, the sound carrying on the summer breeze. "No, Mr. Burke, you've married exactly where you belong." The months that followed were filled with hard work and gradual changes as they settled into married life and continued improving the ranch. Dawson's practical knowledge combined with Ruby's deep understanding of the land made them an effective team. By the first snowfall, the ranch was in better condition than it had been in years, with repaired fences, a solid roof, and a modest but healthy herd of cattle. Word of their success spread, and neighboring ranchers began to seek Dawson's advice on livestock management and predator control. His quiet competence earned respect in the community, transforming him from the mysterious cowboy who had appeared at an auction to a valued member of Clifton Hill society. For Ruby, the greatest change was having a true partner. The burden of running the ranch alone had been crushing, but now the weight was shared, the decisions made together, the triumphs celebrated as one. They worked side by side from dawn until dusk, falling into bed exhausted but fulfilled each night, their bodies finding comfort and passion in each other's arms. Winter brought new challenges as heavy snow isolated the ranch for weeks at a time. They spent the long evenings planning for spring, Dawson sketching ideas for expanding the barn while Ruby calculated how many more cattle they could reasonably support. Sometimes they simply sat before the fire, Ruby reading aloud from one of her father's books while Dawson carved intricate wooden figures that gradually populated the mantelpiece. It was during one such evening, with snow falling softly outside and the cabin warm and snug around them, that Ruby set aside her book and studied her husband's profile. "What would you think about naming the ranch?" she asked. "It's always just been the Faulkner place, but maybe it's time for something that represents both of us." Dawson looked up from his carving, surprise evident in his expression. "You'd want to change the name. It's been in your family for generations." "And now it's in our family," Ruby replied simply. "A new name would mark a new beginning." He considered this, turning the piece of wood thoughtfully in his hands. "What did you have in mind?" "Horizon Ranch," she suggested. "Because that's what you gave me when you paid those taxes, a horizon instead of an ending." The emotion that crossed Dawson's face was swift and powerful. He set aside his carving and moved to kneel beside her chair, taking her hands in his. "Horizon Ranch," he repeated, testing the name. "I like it." Ruby leaned forward to kiss him, but as she moved, a wave of dizziness washed over her. Dawson steadied her, concern immediately replacing tenderness. "Ruby, what's wrong?" She took a deep breath, waiting for the sensation to pass. "Nothing, just a little lightheaded." His brow furrowed. "This is the third time this week. Maybe we should get the doctor next time we're in town." "I don't think that's necessary," Ruby said, a small smile playing at her lips. "I'm fairly certain I know what's causing it." Dawson's expression remained puzzled for a moment before understanding dawned in his eyes. "Ruby, are you?" She nodded, her smile broadening. "I think so. I'm about 6 weeks late and I've been feeling different. Tired, sometimes queasy in the mornings." The joy that transformed Dawson's face was something Ruby knew she would remember for the rest of her days. He gathered her into his arms, holding her as though she were made of the most precious material on earth. "A baby," he whispered against her hair. "Our baby." "The start of our family," Ruby agreed, tears of happiness welling in her eyes. "Our own little horizon to look forward to." Spring brought new life to Horizon Ranch in more ways than one. As the snow melted and the first green shoots pushed through the soil, Ruby's body changed with the landscape, her belly gradually rounding with the child growing within. Dawson became even more protective, insisting on handling the more strenuous tasks alone despite Ruby's protests that pregnancy hadn't rendered her helpless. Their first calving season as a married couple was successful, with 20 healthy calves added to their growing herd. The additional income allowed them to hire occasional help local boys eager to learn ranching and earn pocket money. Dawson proved to be a patient teacher, showing them how to mend fences, care for livestock, and respect the land that sustained them. News of Ruby's pregnancy spread through Clifton Hill, bringing a steady stream of visitors bearing advice, hand-knitted baby clothes and casseroles. Mrs. Peterson organized the women of the town to prepare a proper layette, while Sheriff Jenkins and his deputies surprised Dawson by arriving one Saturday to help build a nursery addition to the cabin. "Never thought I'd see the day," Jenkins remarked as they worked, "when that drifter who paid a stranger's taxes would be putting down such deep roots." Dawson smiled, hammering a nail with practiced precision. "Neither did I, Sheriff. Life has a way of surprising a man." "That it does," Jenkins agreed, passing him another board. "That it does." On a warm July evening, as fireflies danced in the gathering dusk and the scent of summer flowers drifted through the open windows, Ruby's labor began. Dawson rode faster than he ever had to fetch the midwife from town, returning with both Mrs. Coleman and Doc Wilson, unwilling to take any chances with his wife's health. The labor was long and difficult, testing Ruby's strength and Dawson's nerves. He paced outside the bedroom door, flinching at each cry of pain, until Mrs. Coleman finally took pity and allowed him to sit beside Ruby, holding her hand and whispering words of encouragement as she fought to bring their child into the world. As dawn broke on July 10, 1878, their son was born a healthy, robust boy with a shock of dark hair and his father's blue eyes. They named him Thomas James Burke, after both their fathers, and as Dawson held his son for the first time, the emotion that overwhelmed him was unlike anything he had ever experienced. "He's perfect," he whispered, carefully returning the swaddled infant to Ruby's arms. "You're both perfect." Ruby, exhausted but radiant, smiled up at her husband. "He looks like you. Poor kid," Dawson joked, his voice thick with emotion. "Let's hope he gets your brains and determination to balance out my stubborn streak." Doc Wilson clapped Dawson on the shoulder as he prepared to leave. "Congratulations, Burke. You've got a fine family here." Family. The word resonated in Dawson's heart as he watched his wife and son, marveling at how his life had transformed in less than a year. From a solitary cowboy with nothing but dreams and a few $100s to his name, to a husband, father, and respected rancher with land under his feet and love surrounding him. The following Sunday, they took baby Thomas to church for the first time, proudly presenting him for baptism. The entire town seemed to turn out for the occasion, the small church filled to capacity as Reverend Miller blessed the child and welcomed him into the community. After the service, Horace Bellamy approached them, his manner stiff but not unkind. "Fine-looking boy," he acknowledged, nodding toward the sleeping infant in Ruby's arms. "The ranch is looking well, too. You've done good work there, Burke." "Thank you," Dawson replied, genuinely surprised by the compliment from the man who had once been so eager to claim their land. Bellamy hesitated, then continued, "I've got 50 head of cattle I'm looking to sell before winter. Good stock, fair price. Thought you might be interested in expanding your herd." It was an olive branch, offered awkwardly but sincerely. Dawson glanced at Ruby, who gave a slight nod of approval. "I'd be interested in taking a look," Dawson said, extending his hand. "Thank you for thinking of us." As Bellamy walked away, Ruby leaned against her husband's side. "Wonders never cease," she murmured. Horace Bellamy being neighborly. "A child changes things," Dawson observed, gently touching his son's cheek. "Makes people think about the future, about what kind of world they're helping to create." By the time Thomas celebrated his first birthday, Horizon Ranch had doubled its cattle and added a small flock of sheep, diversifying their operation to better weather the unpredictable market. Dawson had constructed a larger barn and expanded the corral, while Ruby had established a productive vegetable garden and started a modest poultry operation that supplied eggs to the general store in town. Their hard work was paying off, transforming the struggling property into one of the most prosperous small ranches in the area. But success brought its own challenges, more responsibilities, less time together, and the constant balance of nurturing both their marriage and their growing business. One evening, after Thomas had been put to bed, Dawson found Ruby sitting on the porch steps, staring at the sunset with a pensive expression. He settled beside her, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "What's on your mind?" he asked, pressing a kiss to her temple. Ruby leaned into him, her body warm against his side. "I was thinking about the auction, the day we met. Not our happiest memory, no," she agreed, "but the most important one." She turned to look at him, her eyes reflecting the golden light of the setting sun. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't been there that day?" Dawson's arm tightened around her. "I try not to. The thought of riding past town, of never knowing you or Thomas." He shook his head. "I can't imagine it. I would have lost everything," Ruby said quietly. "Not just the ranch, but the chance at this life we've built." "You're stronger than you give yourself credit for," Dawson countered. "You would have found a way to start over." "Maybe," she conceded, "but it wouldn't have been this life, it wouldn't have been with you." She nestled closer to him. "Sometimes I think about what made you stop in Clifton Hill that day. Of all the towns you could have passed through." Dawson was silent for a long moment, considering. "I don't know if it was fate or chance or God's hand," he said finally, "but I'm grateful for whatever it was every day." They sat together as darkness fell, watching the first stars appear in the evening sky. The sounds of the ranch settling for the night surrounded them, cattle lowing softly in the distance, the gentle clucking of chickens in their coop, the rustle of wind through the cottonwood trees that lined the creek. "I love you, Dawson Burke," Ruby said softly. "More than I ever thought possible." He turned to her, framing her face with his hands, his expression serious and tender. "And I love you, Ruby Burke. You and Thomas are everything to me, everything." Their kiss was unhurried, a reaffirmation of the bond that had grown between them through shared work and dreams, through the birth of their son and the building of their home. When they finally parted, the night had fully descended, wrapping the ranch in a blanket of darkness pierced only by the warm light spilling from their cabin windows. Hand in hand, they walked back inside to the life they had created together, a life that had begun with an unpaid tax bill and a stranger's unexpected kindness, and had blossomed into something neither of them could have imagined when they first met on that fateful day in Clifton Hill. 5 years passed, bringing changes to both Horizon Ranch and the Burke family. Thomas grew from a toddler into a spirited, curious boy with his mother's quick mind and his father's steady determination. He shadowed Dawson around the ranch, soaking up knowledge like a sponge, already showing a natural affinity for working with the animals. Ruby gave birth to twin daughters in the winter of 1881, Elizabeth and Catherine, named for their grandmothers. The girls, with their matching auburn curls and mischievous smiles, brought new joy and chaos to the household. Dawson proved to be as tender with his daughters as he was patient with his son, rocking them to sleep when they were colicky and fashioning tiny wooden toys for their delight. The ranch continued to prosper under their joint management. They had added another 100 acres to their property, purchasing the adjacent land when old Mr. Fletcher decided to retire to live with his daughter in California. The expanded pastures supported a herd of nearly 200 cattle now, along with the sheep operation that had grown into a profitable sideline. Clifton Hill itself was changing, the railroad having finally reached the town in 1880. The population had nearly doubled as new businesses opened to serve the increased traffic: a proper hotel, a second saloon, a millinery shop, and even a small school where Thomas would begin his formal education in the fall. Ruby had become a respected voice in town affairs, serving on the school board and organizing the annual Harvest Festival. Dawson, though still more comfortable among his livestock than in social settings, had been persuaded to join the town council, where his practical approach to problem-solving and fair-minded nature made him a valued member. Their life together had settled into a rhythm of productive days and peaceful evenings, of shared responsibilities and mutual support. The struggles of those early days had faded, though neither forgot the lessons learned during leaner times. One crisp autumn morning, as Dawson and 7-year-old Thomas rode the fence line checking for repairs, they spotted a lone rider approaching from the direction of town. As the figure drew closer, Dawson recognized Sheriff Jenkins, now showing his age with silver hair and a slight stoop to his shoulders. "Morning, Sheriff," Dawson called, reining his horse to a stop. "What brings you out this way?" Jenkins dismounted stiffly, nodding a greeting to Thomas before turning to Dawson with a solemn expression. "Got some news I thought you should hear from me, rather than through town gossip." Concerned, Dawson swung down from his saddle. "Thomas, why don't you ride ahead and check that section by the creek? Stay within sight." Once the boy was out of earshot, Jenkins continued. "Horace Bellamy passed last night. Heart gave out, according to Doc Wilson." The news, though not entirely unexpected given Bellamy's declining health in recent months, still came as a shock. The man had been a fixture in the community for decades, and despite their rocky beginning, he and Dawson had developed a grudging respect for each other over the years. "I'm sorry to hear it," Dawson said sincerely. "He was a complicated man, but he cared about this land." Jenkins nodded. "That he did." He paused, weighing his next words. "There's more. His lawyer came to see me this morning. Seems Bellamy's will has some unexpected provisions." "Oh." He left the bulk of his ranch to his nephew in St. Louis, as expected, but he carved out the northeast section, about 300 acres including that prime grazing land along Silver Creek, and left it to you and Ruby. Dawson stared at the sheriff, certain he had misheard. "To us." "Why would he do that?" Jenkins shrugged. "His letter says he admired what you two built here, starting from almost nothing. Says the land should go to someone who knows its value." He produced an envelope from his vest pocket. "He left this for you. Private communication, he called it." Still stunned, Dawson accepted the letter, turning it over in his hands. "I don't know what to say." "Well, you've got about a week to think on it. The nephew's arriving next Tuesday to settle the estate." Jenkins remounted his horse. "Give my best to Ruby and those little girls." After the sheriff departed, Dawson called Thomas back and they completed their rounds in thoughtful silence. The boy, sensing his father's preoccupation, asked few questions, though his curious glances suggested he knew something significant had occurred. When they returned to the ranch house, Ruby was hanging laundry in the yard while the twins played nearby, building precarious towers with wooden blocks. Her smile at seeing them faltered when she caught Dawson's expression. "What is it?" she asked, setting down her basket of clothes. "Horace Bellamy died last night," Dawson replied, dismounting and helping Thomas down. "And he's left us a piece of his property in his will." Ruby's eyes widened. "What? Why would he do that?" "I'm not sure," Dawson admitted, producing the unopened letter, "but he left this." After settling Thomas with his sisters and asking him to watch them for a few minutes, Ruby and Dawson retreated to the porch to read Bellamy's final communication. The letter was brief but revealing, written in the old rancher's shaky hand. "Burke and Ruby, by the time you read this, I'll be gone. No need for sentiments. We both know I was a hard man to like, let alone understand. But I respected what you built and how you built it. That day at the auction, Burke, when you paid Ruby's taxes without asking for anything in return, I thought you were either a fool or had some scheme I couldn't see. Took me years to realize you were neither just a man who recognized something worth saving and had the courage to act. The land I'm leaving you is the first piece I ever owned. Started there with nothing but 20 head of cattle and more determination than sense. Seems fitting it should go to a family who understands what it means to build something from the ground up, make it thrive." Horace Bellamy. Ruby wiped away a tear as Dawson folded the letter, his own throat tight with unexpected emotion. "I never would have guessed he felt that way," she said softly. "Me neither." Dawson slipped the letter into his pocket. 300 acres, Ruby. Prime grazing land with year-round water access. It would let us expand the herd considerably, she calculated quickly. Maybe even venture into horse breeding like you've been wanting to. Dawson nodded, his mind already racing with possibilities. The additional land would transform Horizon Ranch from a successful family operation into one of the largest in the county, securing their children's future and creating opportunities they had only dreamed of until now. "It's a remarkable legacy," Ruby continued, leaning against the porch railing. "Not just the land itself, but the acknowledgement of what we've built." She looked at Dawson with shining eyes. "From an auction block to this, who would have imagined?" That evening, after the children were asleep, Ruby found Dawson sitting at the kitchen table, papers spread before him, property maps, cattle counts, financial records. He looked up as she entered, his expression both excited and contemplative. "Planning our empire." She teased gently, settling into the chair beside him. He smiled, taking her hand. "Just thinking about how far we've come. That day in town when I paid your taxes, I had no plan beyond helping someone who deserved a chance. And now look at us," Ruby marveled. 3 beautiful children, a thriving ranch about to get bigger, respect in the community. She squeezed his hand. "All because you stopped at an auction in a town you were just passing through." "Best detour I ever took," Dawson agreed, his voice warm with affection. "Though I'm not sure detour is the right word anymore. More like finding the road I was meant to be on all along." Ruby leaned forward to kiss him, a gesture still filled with the same tenderness and passion that had marked their relationship from the beginning. "I love you, Dawson Burke. Thank you for saving my ranch and in doing so, giving me the life I never knew I wanted." "I love you too, Ruby Burke," he replied, cupping her cheek. "And if I saved your ranch, you saved me right back, gave me a home, a family, a purpose." His blue eyes, still as intense as the day they met, held hers. "I'd pay those taxes 100 times over for the life we've built." Outside their window, the Montana night stretched vast and star-filled over Horizon Ranch. Inside, the family Dawson and Ruby had created slept peacefully, secure in the love that had begun with an unexpected act of kindness and grown into something neither could have imagined that fateful summer day in Clifton Hill. The years continued to flow. each season bringing new challenges and joys to Horizon Ranch. The Burke family expanded once more with the arrival of their youngest son, David, born in the spring of 1885. With 4 children ranging from toddler to 12 years old, the ranch house echoed with laughter, occasional squabbles, and the constant energy of young lives taking shape. The additional land from Bellamy's bequest had indeed transformed their operation. Dawson had implemented his dream of breeding quality horses, developing a line of sturdy, intelligent mounts that were increasingly sought after throughout the territory. Ruby had expanded their sheep flock and established a small wool processing operation that employed several women from town, providing them with steady income and a sense of community. Thomas, now 14, was his father's right hand on the ranch, showing a natural talent for working with the horses and a head for the business side of ranching that impressed even the most experienced cattlemen. The twins, Elizabeth and Catherine, at 8 years old, were as different as sisters could be. Elizabeth quiet and thoughtful like her father, Catherine fiery and outspoken like her mother, yet inseparable in their adventures. Little David, just turning 4, toddled after his older siblings with determined enthusiasm, already insisting he was big enough to help with the chores. Clifton Hill had grown into a proper small city, with the railroad bringing regular commerce and new settlers. The one-room schoolhouse had expanded to a proper school building with 3 teachers, and plans were underway for a county hospital. Ruby served as president of the Ladies' Improvement Society, which had successfully lobbied for a public library and proper sidewalks throughout the town center. Dawson, though still more comfortable on horseback than behind a desk, had reluctantly accepted the position of mayor the previous year after Sheriff Jenkins and Reverend Miller had convinced him that his practical wisdom was needed as the town continued to grow. He approached the role as he did everything else with quiet determination, careful thought, and an unwavering sense of fairness. Their 20th wedding anniversary arrived on a perfect June day in 1898. The children, with the help of neighbors and friends, had planned a surprise celebration at the ranch, inviting half the county to honor the couple whose story had become something of a local legend. As guests began arriving that afternoon, Dawson pulled Ruby aside to the quiet sanctuary of their bedroom, where he presented her with a small wooden box. "I wanted to give you this privately," he explained as she opened it. Inside lay a delicate gold locket, far more elaborate than any jewelry Ruby had owned before. When she opened it, she found tiny portraits of their 4 children on one side and a miniature reproduction of the tax receipt that had started their journey together on the other. "Dawson," she breathed, tears filling her eyes. "It's perfect." "Had it made special in Helena," he said, helping her fasten it around her neck. "Seemed right to remember how it all began on today of all days." Ruby touched the locket reverently, then looked up at her husband. His face was more lined now, his dark hair streaked with silver, but his blue eyes still held the same steadfast quality that had first drawn her to him. "I have something for you too," she said, retrieving a package from her dresser drawer, "though it's not nearly as elegant." Dawson unwrapped the brown paper to reveal a leather-bound journal, the cover tooled with the Horizon Ranch brand. Opening it, he found page after page of Ruby's neat handwriting, interspersed with small sketches and pressed flowers. "I started writing our story the day after we married," she explained. "Every important moment, every milestone. I thought our children and grandchildren should know how it all began with a cowboy who paid a stranger's taxes and asked for nothing in return." Dawson's throat tightened with emotion as he carefully turned the pages, seeing their life together captured in Ruby's thoughtful words. "This is the greatest gift I could imagine," he said, his voice rough. Thank you. They held each other for a long moment, the sounds of the gathering celebration drifting through the open window. 20 years of partnership, of shared dreams and challenges, of building a life neither had dared imagine that day at the auction block. "We should join our guests," Ruby said finally, straightening Dawson's string tie. "The children have worked so hard planning this." "One more thing first," Dawson replied, taking her hands in his. 20 years ago, I made the best decision of my life when I stopped in Clifton Hill. Everything good I have came from that moment. You, our children, this home, this life we've built." He brought her fingers to his lips. "I love you more today than I did then, Ruby Burke, more than I thought possible." "And I love you," Ruby whispered, her heart as full as it had been on their wedding day. "My cowboy who asked for nothing and gave me everything." Hand in hand, they walked out to join the celebration, greeted by the cheers of friends and family gathered to honor their journey. As the afternoon sun cast golden light across Horizon Ranch, Dawson and Ruby stood surrounded by the life they had created together, their children, their land, their community, all born from a moment of kindness at an auction that should have been an ending, but instead became the most beautiful beginning. Under the vast Montana sky, on the ranch that had nearly been lost, but instead had flourished beyond imagination, the legacy of that day lived on, a testament to courage, to second chances, and to the enduring power of love that asks for nothing but gives everything in return.